Western civilization. How much do you know? My name is Russell Miles, and this is the 23rd episode of our Western Civilization series. In the previous episode, we looked at HIV/AIDS and the pursuit of a solution. In this episode, we're going to explore its origins, the false leads, and the development of a global response. Primates other than humans also have what is called simian immunodeficiency virus. This rarely seems to make primates sick and may have been in existence for centuries. They include chimpanzees and gorillas, monkey mandrills, African green monkeys, baboons, sooty manbays, and cyke monkeys. HIV-1 looks like CIV found in common chimpanzees and HIV-2 like that found in sooty mangabeys. Japanese researchers were to make great strides in collecting blood samples and analysing primates in Western and Central Africa. This had shown that the incidence of SIV in chimpanzees was highest in Cameroon. A disease outbreak among monkeys in a primate centre in California in 1969 was later noted to have been similar to AIDS. There were two further outbreaks in 1976 and 1978. By the 1990s, scientists were looking for fossil viruses, human tissue and blood samples collected for other purposes and preserved. The oldest was found among 1,200 stored plasma samples from Zaire, Congo and South Africa and Mozambique. One specimen collected in 1959 from an unknown individual from Kinshasa, then a Belgian colony, was positive for HIV strain ZR59. This looked very similar to modern HIV strains, so by deduction could not have entered the human population much prior till 1940. However, an examination of specimen recovered from lymph node preserved in 1960 in Kinshasa was very different from more contemporary HIV ZR96. With estimated time for viruses to evolve able to be calculated, it could be determined that HIV had entered the human population between 1884 and 1924. The virus may have spread to and from Kinshasa along infrastructure routes, roads, railways and rivers, via migrants and the sex trade. There have been several cases of clinical staff handling primates being scratched and being infected by SIV from open wounds, so this was considered a likely means of crossover from primates to humans. Although extremely difficult to culture HIV outside of human tissues, so this was not conclusive. Examination of infection among population groups over time suggested a focus that something extraordinary had happened in the mid-1970s in the Cameroon in Western Africa that spurred the AIDS pandemic. There were hypotheses about other mechanisms for humans to have become infected by SIV which became HIV. These range from mass immunisation programs with polio vaccine made from green monkey kidney cells where needles were reused. However, SIV in green monkeys was quite different from HIV and unlike that in chimpanzees. Immunisation for herpes was another theory, except it was widely used in other population groups which did not develop AIDS. There were hoaxes and fakes, including stories about biological warfare experiments, genetic experimentation, and even by a meteorite from space. These theories were spread when real scandals about Agent Orange having poisoned people and caused genetic malformation was emerging, along with asbestosis, Minamata disease, and radiation sickness. HIV-2 is the rarer of the two and present in West Africa. It is also much harder to transmit and infect others. It is also more seen in cases of infection between mothers and babies. HIV-2 is closest to SIV seen in sooty mangabeys, which live in the forest along the west coast of Africa around Ghana and Senegal. HIV-2 is also seen in a tiny number of cases of infected persons where the virus spread ends with the infected person's death. These abnormal cases were to confuse researchers in their search for a primary cause. A perplexity is that the highest incidence of HIV-2 is in the former Portuguese colonies, which are dispersed along the coast used by the Portuguese Empire to sail to the east, i.e. not geographically adjacent. One view is Portuguese soldiers in their colonial wars in the 1960s and 70s were the conduit. As of 2002, Portugal had the highest incidence of HIV in Western Europe, but the conduit to Portugal remains unknown, and it is more likely to have spread from other European countries. The most accepted hypothesis is that the practice of hunting and eating wild animals in traditional African society caused the crossover. A study in Cameroon noted a correlation of HIV-infected people via reported behaviour towards wild animals in 14 villages studied. The incidence of HIV was 85% in those who ate wild animals, 50% in those who butchered wild animals, 12% for hunting, and 8% for pets. The HIV genetic diversity was also wide in rural villages with frequent contact with wild animals. So what was the event that caused the AIDS pandemic? This is easier to understand. In the late 1800s, Western European countries were seeking a place in the sun, African colonies. This was to exploit natural resources, agriculture, mining, people. To build infrastructure such as roads and ports, work farms, mines, etc., saw the cohesion of a male workforce. With men away from their local areas and families, there was an explosion of prostitution and sex trade. Within traditional village communities, any sexually transmitted virus would have less opportunity for new hosts, so tend not to spread. In the post-Second World War era, the United States and then the UK pressed decolonisation of both their own overseas possessions and those of other European countries. While this was orderly in some regions, in southern Africa with extreme racism, it entailed conflict, wars, mass delocation of people. The Cold War adversaries exacerbated these conflicts. The wars were at their height in the mid-1970s. And that was the event. In the search for the vector that brought AIDS from Africa to Europe and the United States, researchers in Belgium had located a Greek man who died of AIDS in the early 70s. This man had been a sailor, a traveller, and a fisherman on Lake Victoria. Another Belgian man, a physician who had worked in Zambia, was determined to have died of AIDS along with his wife and child. The scientific consensus is that HIV may have crossed from primates to humans at various times, but in pre-colonised Africa, the small communities and families limited the opportunity for new hosts, so any virus soon died out. The turmoil and violence of colonisation created an environment for humans with HIV to spread the infection from the forest of the hinterland to the coast and by shipping to Western Europe and the east coast of USA, along with Haiti. Destitution amongst IV drug users and black immigrants then allowed AIDS epidemic to slowly grow without detection. It was not until the pandemic spread to homosexual and middle-class men of European heritage in the San Francisco area who had access to health services that the pandemic was first detected. This was quite fortunate, as the epidemic had not spread to the general population, where the options to control the STI would have been more difficult. The promotion of condom use and needle exchange turned out to be extremely effective. The song I Am What I Am from the Broadway musical La Cage aux Folles, originally a French play about a gay couple whose son becomes engaged to a girl of conservative parents, this award-winning musical and much-covered song was considered a global gay anthem, and along with same-sex marriage illustrates the change in social attitudes within the era of AIDS.
Give me the hope of your vision. It's my
By 1993, over 2.5 million cases of HIV/AIDS had been confirmed worldwide. At a rally in 1993, Billy Graham was asked about his previous remarks that AIDS might be a judgment from God. "I could not say for sure, but I think so," he said. Then 2 weeks later he apologised, saying, "I don't believe that, and I don't know why I said it." In 2019, the World Health Organization reported that 33 million people have died due to AIDS. There are an estimated 38 million people living with HIV by the end of 2019. Moreover, 2/3 of adults living with HIV and half of children were receiving lifelong retrovirus therapy. But due to gaps in HIV services, 700,000 people died from HIV-related causes in 2019 and 1.7 million people were newly affected. Our next podcast will conclude the current series about Western civilization by looking at mental health and introducing biopsychosocial model of medicine. If you like this channel, please subscribe and tick like. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I can be contacted at email russmills@iprimers.com.au. Thanks for listening.